Welcome to Collegehood Advice. My name's Katie. I'm so happy you're here. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Bari Norman to talk about how to navigate the unexpected from fall 2020, as well as what to do if you've deferred and what to expect from the admissions process of 2021. I know this is a really hard time and that your college may have just shifted its policy from what you were expecting, or perhaps you're sitting in your dorm room right now and you're worried about what happens if your college closes. Today, Dr. Norman and I are going to talk through the different kinds of scenarios that you might anticipate this fall and beyond, how to navigate them, and what to expect from admissions going forward. She provides tons of important information, so I hope you stick around whether you're at college, thinking about going to college, or not quite sure yet what you should do about this semester. Dr. Bari Norman is the founder of Expert Admissions. She's a seasoned admissions counselor from Bari Norman University. She is also a very prominent expert on college admissions. She's been interviewed on The Atlantic and USA Today, amongst other prominent news outlets. I'm really honored to have her on the show. I think she's a big help. And so let's dive in and welcome Dr. Bari Norman. So today we are going to talk about how to prepare for going to college this fall of 2020 during COVID. And I know that there are some listeners who may already be sitting in their dorm rooms or participating in an orientation, but for others of you, you may not yet be, or you may still have uncertainty even if you know what the plan is at this moment. So I thought I'd invite Dr. Norman on the show to talk through the different scenarios to help you both with your planning, but also with your ability to pivot, to anticipate different circumstances that you may bump into throughout your semester. And so we're going to dive in to just kind of talking about, in general, what plans universities have for returning students so that you might know kind of what the different array of options might be for you or what you might be seeing on different college campuses. So that being said, Bari, what plans do universities have for returning students?
So it really runs the gamut. It depends what school you're going to, and the previously announced plans, as we've learned, especially in the last week, can change. So we have some students who are on campus right now. We have some students who are getting ready to get there, in the next few days. And then just before I came on to this podcast today, I read a note from a university that just canceled its plans for fall and said no in-person classes at all. Everything is going remote, and we're not allowing you to come on campus for housing either. And the plan up until a few moments ago was to have students come back for some on-campus classes, some remote classes, but to be residential. And it just completely flipped. And we've seen a few colleges in the past week actually make similar announcements. So I think, like you said, the key for this year is flexibility and almost the anticipation of things changing and being ready for it. So what you're going to see across campuses is really a wide array. We've got large state universities that are having some in-person classes and some remote classes and inviting all 4 classes of students back to campus residentially. And then we have other schools, bigger and smaller, who won't have anything on campus and everything in between. And it really, really depends on the school that you're attending. And we are seeing, as I said, colleges change plans at what feels like and certainly is kind of at the last minute.
Which I know can be really overwhelming and frustrating for all of us. Are you seeing any patterns? Is it regional? Is it where people are experiencing spikes? Is it just sort of across the board, personal to a particular campus's culture and leadership?
Yeah, in some ways you can make some broad generalizations, but just as fast as I can make them, I can of course give you some exceptions. But what I would say is, if you were thinking very generally, we seem to see more state schools opening as opposed to private schools, or maybe it's better to say state schools not closing versus the private schools, which seem to be leaning a bit more toward being extra, on the cautious side. One thing that's really fascinating is, so one of the schools that has made a recent announcement is Columbia University, and Columbia is in New York City, and New York City has among the lowest COVID numbers in the country at this point. And precisely because of that, that's the reason they cited the reason for needing to actually cancel the residential fall and turn fully remote, is that because the numbers are so low here and there's 33 states that are on a quarantine list once you arrive, it really was untenable for them to have students coming from all over the country and all over the world and actually have a fall semester. And then you see a lot of schools that are in hotspots that are opening. And so it doesn't always sort of make sense logically what schools are doing if you really think of it on the surface. Although when you hear Columbia's rationale, it does certainly make sense. But the hope, I think, and the general assumption would be is that the lower the numbers, the better chance you have for your school opening. And that doesn't seem to necessarily be the case. It also doesn't necessarily seem to be the case that it matters how big your school is. A lot of people thought that the bigger schools would have trouble opening, and we're actually seeing that a lot of the big schools are in fact opening and are already in session.
It's so interesting. It seems to me like the key here is assume nothing, pay very close attention to what the conversations are at your particular school, and look at your email pretty regularly so that you can be up to date on whatever announcements are going out. Even if they had one plan in place, they may change direction pretty quickly, it sounds like.
Yes, absolutely. So, a few weeks ago, we would have said, what is a plan B? Well, you're just going to do whatever your school is doing. And we thought that the announcement that was made would be what would happen this fall. But we really have seen, especially in the last week or so, several colleges dial back their plans for even a partially in-person semester. Places like Stanford that were going to have 2 classes of students on campus pulled back entirely. And that's because the numbers are higher in California. So they had the same outcome as a New York school that has very, very low numbers, but came to the same conclusion, and both actually reversed earlier plans that were announced.
So with all of this uncertainty and shifting in plans, how can a student best prepare for this new reality?
It's a good question. And, I'm sure this isn't the first time that students have heard, you have to be prepared and be flexible, and you have to, kind of have different plans and be ready to kind of, roll with the punches. But this is an entirely different level of that. And I think adults join you in the discomfort of it, certainly to some degree. But the real lesson we're all learning is truly the need to just be open to change and almost to expect it. And if it doesn't happen, you're like pleasantly surprised, as opposed to kind of putting everything into whatever's being said at the moment. And then if and when it does change, feeling more crestfallen, perhaps. This is disappointing news, whether you've prepared yourself somewhat mentally for it or not. And there's no getting around that. And you should engage with that and make sure that you acknowledge the sadness and the disappointment and the loss that you feel, if those are things you're feeling. But you can handle it better if it doesn't feel like an enormous shock, I think. And that's really the key, is that when the announcement is made, ideally it wouldn't be the first time your brain is entertaining the thought and what to do. And so kind of in your mind, you would make plans to say, if it changes, this is what I would do. And hopefully it won't. But if it does, this is how I'm going to handle it, or this is what my plan will be. And then regretfully, you might move to plan B, but at least you have one.
What kinds of things are you recommending to students for Plan B? I know here on Collegehood, we've had several conversations on, should you take a gap year? What do you do if you have an unexpected gap year? Should you go to community college? Should you just hit pause? What kinds of things are you seeing and recommending to students?
So it depends on students' interests. It of course is going to depend on finances, and it also depends on when you get the information that causes you to switch to Plan B. So some of the things that students of mine have been doing, it's obviously a big election year, and there's a lot of work and effort regardless of which side you're supporting. There's a lot of work going on, and so I've had students get extremely involved in campaigning and in the campaigns, and there's a lot of interest and a lot of work there. It's also been interesting because as the world has changed, office culture and company culture has changed, and students of mine have both continued with internships that would have been in person, but now went virtual and went really, really well. And even I have students who have gotten new offers and new experiences that wouldn't have been available to them before because it wouldn't be virtual. And so there are organizations, there are companies that are still pulling in students to work, even though it can't be in person. And that in some ways has opened up opportunity just as much, if not more, than it's closed some doors as well. And we also have seen gap year programs, both transitioning not as much to virtual, but being creative in ways to safely run programs for students who are in just this position. Traveling and things like that, which are things students may have done before and could have even done cheaply, that's become a harder thing to do. And students are kind of needing to find something really to do. And there's volunteer work, and there's also things that you can create on your own, but there's actually a fair amount of opportunity. I would even say more than I had expected, for, as I've seen with my students, things that they've been able to make happen and to kind of find, because everybody's kind of made this pivot.
Sure. I'm seeing a lot of the same things. And so I think if you're feeling like there's nothing, I'm behind, there's nothing to do, this is a waste, or any of those sentiments I am hearing from students, that there's quite a bit more to do and quite a bit more creative problem solving and solutions than maybe you would have anticipated happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think at first, 100%, everyone was sort of on pause. We didn't know what was going to happen. As things went virtual, it seemed like things were getting quote unquote canceled. And what we learned is that the world, yes, the world has sort of stopped in a way that we knew it, but the world hasn't stopped. Everybody is moving or trying their best to move forward. It took some companies a little longer to get their bearings and to realize kind of what's possible and how can we do this well, not just pivot, but pivot well. But it's really been wonderful. And I've seen it actually with private companies, and I've had students doing government related internships, social justice type internships, and really some wonderful things that I have to say has been a wonderfully good surprise, like a happy surprise, because I think we were all worried about what was going to be. And especially for students who were kind of trying to figure out, do I take that gap year, or do I stay home, or do I go to campus? They were kind of thinking, well, there's really no option if I stay home except to just stay home. And what we are finding is that while it might be challenging and it might require some creativity, that's not the other option. It could be one of them, but it's not the only option. It's not sort of stay home, socially distance, and live with my parents and get to do nothing, or go to campus. There are ways to make this productive. There are ways to get engaged. And even as things, depending where you live, even as things open up a little bit, or even just get a little bit more open, students are able to kind of get out there a little bit more and a little bit differently, maybe with masks on, but able to get out there and do some of the work that they were anticipating doing.
So true. Another question came to mind in kind of a different direction. Students who maybe hit pause or delayed their entrance into college, or students who are starting the admission process for next year, are there any words or information, or what does that landscape look like for folks who are trying to enter the college for the 21-22 school year? Are there changes or things that they should be aware of?
Yes, so this is going to be a very, very unusual admissions year for a variety of reasons. We're now at the point where 2/3 of US colleges and universities are test optional for 2020-2021, the application cycle. That is an extraordinary shift. And there are a lot of knee-jerk reactions to that. One of the most popular being sort of, well, I don't care about tests because the colleges don't. I don't have to worry about them. And while that to some degree is true, certainly the pressure on the testing has been alleviated by quite a bit. Colleges aren't saying they don't want the tests. They're just saying we understand that you were not able to take them, and so we'll consider your application without the exam, without those exam scores. Now, there are a small number of colleges that are test blind. Test blind means no matter who sends them in, we're not considering them. And so you want to pay attention, very careful attention to language. And so if you see test optional and you see test blind, those are two very different things. We are seeing the professional association associated with colleges and counselors trying to get colleges to come out more forcefully and really say optional means optional. And I think it does mean optional. They're not going to penalize you if you don't have it, But at the same time, if you are able to give a college a good score, whatever that means for that school, it will be helpful to them and to you. And so the knee-jerk reaction to this test optional movement this year shouldn't be, well, then forget the tests. If you think you can, if you think you can do well, but don't stress if test centers are closed and if you're unable to get to a testing center. This has significant ramifications for the high school class of 2021. We also have the issue of international students, both not being able to get here and also maybe thinking this isn't the best time to apply to go to college in the United States. And a really big thing is the deferral of students from the class of 2020. So this is something that, depending on the school you are attending or you're applying to, the number may be as small as, kind of lower than 10% or around 10% to as high as 40%. Harvard University announced maybe just last week or so that 20% of their students are not coming. And when you have that many students from a class who aren't coming to campus, well, they have to show up the following year as first years. And so what does that mean for the current seniors who want to apply? Are their seats already taken from an already small number of seats? Are their seats already taken that now make it more difficult for them to attend and get in? The other thing that the test optional movement is going to do is it's going to make, obviously, many students who have strong grades and strong extracurriculars but didn't have the test scores quite to match apply to some places they wouldn't have bothered applying to in the olden days, so to speak, pre-COVID. And now they have every business applying and they actually might get in. And so we're going to see applications rise at colleges and we're going to see admission rates plunge. And so it's going to be a hard year to predict things, harder than in the past. It's going to be different for the counselors who are reading things on the other side. But there are so many factors kind of coming into play. If I had to give advice to students who are current seniors who are applying this year, I would say make sure that your list has a true range of schools. It may be harder this year, and you may find, like the class of 2020 with the wait list, that it actually gave them a little bit of breathing room. You want to be prepared for both scenarios. And so you don't want to overshoot too much, and you also don't want to not have you want to make sure you have a cushion as well. Make sure your list is wide and varied. Make sure that you, if you can, and if you're able, that you try to take tests and submit scores only if they're in range and they're good for a school. And really do keep your mind open. It's hard now for students. They can't really get to campus in most instances for a variety of reasons. You may not get to visit until later. Definitely use Instagram and stories and things like that and TikTok to try to engage and get the sense of colleges, because you're not going to be able to get to all of them on campus. And that will help you pick schools better. It'll help you write better essays, and it will ultimately help you have better options in the end.
That's so important and so interesting, and something that everyone's thinking so presently, right? Like, what am I doing right now that they may not be thinking ahead? But it sounds like that there's going to be some ramifications maybe for the next couple admission cycles that students experience.
Yeah, we'll know a lot more for students who are current rising juniors, right? We'll have the benefit of seeing what happens in this year. We'll also know better from the international student perspective how many students did ultimately show up on campus. Because students say they have certain plans, but as things change, for instance, how many students now, when they got the information this morning that now their campus is fully remote and non-residential, how many first years now say, you know what, now I'm going to take the gap year. If I could have gotten to campus, even if it was all remote learning, I would have done it. But now that I can't even be on campus and it's fully remote for the entire fall, maybe now I will actually sit it out. And so we're going to see kind of what all those numbers mean and what those numbers are. We also, for those students out there listening who are thinking about transferring, which is another thing people are talking about, is this a time maybe to transfer as maybe more spaces open up at different schools? And we will see. We have fewer international students coming to campus, no doubt, but we also have essentially no students in the US studying abroad who are taking up space. And so that will be another interesting thing to see how it plays out with the numbers admissions-wise.
Oh, that's very interesting, the transferring bit. And I think to students who were maybe not first year, but also continuing students who may take a semester off or a year off mid-range. Gap year is traditionally at the front end of a college experience, but there are definitely students who are putting it in the middle, which is a
Yes.
shift as well.
Yes, and there are many students who are talking about that. You know, people understandably think of the first year students, and we also you can't people aren't really taking a gap year on the senior year end, but colleges are trying desperately to get them to campus by spring for at least graduation, and hoping to get the class of 2020 in many instances on campus for some kind of 1 year late graduation. But students who are kind of in the middle, they've often been sort of set aside as lower priority than the first years and the seniors when campuses have talked about getting back to campus. But the kids in the middle, those students who are sophomores and juniors this year, they also know what they're missing when they don't come back the way that they're used to. And they are at a point in their college career where, if you add the year in the middle, does it matter so much? And so we are hearing some students who are thinking about that. They have another option, though, that first years typically don't have, which is that, and I've spoken to several of my former students about this, is they got an off-campus apartment, and whether classes were either in person or blended in some way, remote or even fully remote, they're living off campus with their friends and feel that's obviously a better option than living at home. But you have to be at least a sophomore, usually often a junior or a senior, for that to be fully comfortable and doable. So students are trying to be creative a bit about it as well, to try and get some semblance of the experience. I was just talking to a current rising, like a senior in college, a former student of mine, and that's exactly what she's doing. She's at Duke, and she's got an apartment with a few girlfriends, and they're really happy. They want to salvage as much of their senior year as possible.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground. I want to cover two more things before we sign off. One, how can listeners connect with you, and are there any resources that you would recommend to students who are trying to weigh this decision about what they should do this semester?
Yeah, in terms of getting in touch with me, you can go to www.expertadmissions.com, and admissions is plural, and that's our website. We have a blog with a ton of information, including for those students who are current juniors and seniors, the ever evolving list of test optional schools as a result of COVID. So if you need like a one-stop shop to say, like, let me see about what a school's policy is, we have that. And a ton of other information where you can kind of guide yourself through the process. And as far as, information relating to kind of what to do in this environment, we are also doing a weekly roundup on our blog, kind of the most important college admissions news for people applying and for students who are heading out, and trying to keep content up for students, that kind of like news you can use. Because we always want that. And so I would encourage you to do that. The college admissions news is in mainstream media quite a bit, and that's how most of the colleges are getting their information out as far as fall planning. But when it comes down to sort of what to do in these times, there are some of us who are blogging and trying to get that information out. If you sign up for our newsletter, also we have constant webinars. We're trying to do sort of real-time webinars and helpful series for students and for parents who are trying to navigate these funky times.
Yes, there's so much to navigate. Is there anything else that we missed that you really want to share or emphasize before we sign off?
Yeah, I think for students who are getting ready to apply, definitely work really hard on your essays and really be thoughtful, and really try to be your authentic self, and try to really focus your supplemental essays for each school, because this year, every year those are enormously important, but this year even more so, especially as more students apply test optional. And so really pay attention to your essays and pay attention to your list. Like, really try to be thoughtful about your list. Don't just throw it together. Each school should really be intentional on your part. And then for students who are heading off to college, or, whatever that looks like, whether that means you're going to, create a space in your house that you grew up in that you were hoping to head out from this fall, or whether you're going to have the opportunity to get on campus and hopefully stay there. We hope that the kids who are getting to campus are going to be able to stay there for the full semester. Is really, these are tough times, and as best you can, it sounds cliche, but it's cliche because it's true, is you make the best of it and just be ready to make the adjustments necessary. But we are really all in this together, and especially people who are in this sort of fall semester. there's no bigger bonding experience than this. I will say that. And I think there's been surprising ways that everybody has connected during a time when we can't really be with one another. And if that's the one lesson that we learn from this, it would be a good one. And so just try to keep that in mind. We're not trying to sugarcoat what's happening, but we got to do what, it is what it is, and you got to do the best with what you've been given.
Yeah, sometimes you have to navigate life's uncertainty, and you just have to make the most of what your resources are at a given moment, and that's gonna actually ultimately serve you moving forward in your life. I think anyone who can come through this experience and kind of grow and learn some of these lessons is going to be stronger for it once in the post-COVID world, hopefully.
100%. It's hard to hear that now, and it doesn't make right now feel any better. But we all know that in our heads. And again, adults are thinking the same thing. When is this going to be over? I'm done. I've had it. I've already been flexible beyond, and I've already done what I'm supposed to do beyond. So adults get it for sure. And there are things on the other side of this for us too. And we're impatient and waiting for it. But, it's what helps you get through, and you still want each day to day, your day to day to be good. And we do have control over that as much as we can.
Absolutely. Well, Bari, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about this really challenging topic.
Thank you for having me, and good luck to everybody.